What can people learn about Calvin Coolidge, and how can it apply to the problems that we have today, especially fiscally?
Well, the main thing to know about Coolidge is that he cut the budget as president. He didn't just reduce the growth, he actually cut it. And this over a long period. So he's an unknown president, he's from the 20s, but he did that thing we want to do. And how did he do it? First, by establishing trust in government, by showing that he meant what he said, by honoring his colleagues. He didn't say a lot of mean things about the opposition, building a coalition to cut, and then second by just cutting, and when people were mad, well, he took it. Another president said the buck stops here, but with Coolidge, the buck also stopped, and that's important to know.
So can we apply this to the fiscal situation we've got now in the country, with the country being having a $17 billion deficit?
Absolutely. When the Coolidge book came out, it happened that Mrs. Thatcher died right then, and so I had to write about it as a journalist. And I was thinking, and in the olden days in the UK, in Britain, they said the Tory party has to be sweet and fair and get along and be flexible, and you never could have imagined that a Mrs. Thatcher could be chosen leader and do the hard things she did. But the economy in the UK got a little challenged, and suddenly a leader was needed. It's sort of like that with Coolidge. We can't imagine having a conservative hero like Coolidge who would cut the budget, but that's because our interest rates are real low. When the interest rate goes past 6%, you know what? Americans will be looking for someone who has the authority to cut the deficit, the confidence, the willingness to do the hard thing, and people like Coolidge will be models.
Now, the popular perception of Coolidge is that he wasn't that great a president, and that some of his laissez-faire policies led to the Great Depression. I assume you don't agree with that.
Well, one of the things that we do when we go back to history now, and we have a lot more data than we used to, we can actually go back and look. We don't just have to rely on the books in the library. We go to the primary sources. So you go back and look at the 20s, which is Coolidge's decade, and they were a pretty good decade. Most economists agree that the growth in the 20s was not a lie, that it was real. You can see that by measures, not only GDP, but also measures such as the patent rate, the productivity gains, all that. It was a sort of fabulous decade. People got electricity, they got a toilet, you can't argue with that. You got a car. So the great Gatsby image of the rich prevailing with nobody else prevailing is kind of false, the cliche image. But the second thing, did he cause the Great Depression? So you would answer as Silent Cal would, monosyllabically, no. And I've written another book even before that, which many readers will know, The Forgotten Man, A History of the 30s, which shows the causes of the Great Depression. And they were multiple, but basically bottom line, and this is what we're finding when we look at history now, whether we're an economist or historian, the government got in the way in the 30s and made it worse, whether it was Hoover, the Republican president, or Roosevelt, the Democratic one.
So another popular perception from the political right is that that FDR really didn't save the country from the Depression. It was World War II that bailed out the country, right?
Well, that's what we learned in school. That's what our parents told us. My parents were Democrats. They told me that. I think when I examined it in Forgotten Man, and I teach this in a course at New York University, and some other teachers are looking at this too. You look at the end of the Depression, the single question you want to ask is not how did the war end the Depression, but why did that gosh darn Depression last all the way to that war? So you see in the American economy, if you study the data, an economy that's desiring to right itself, but keep stumbling on new impediments. One of the things I discovered in my research was that what was key was the president's decision. He had been waging war on business in the New Deal period to cease that war. Why did he cease the war on business? Because he had another war to prosecute, a real war, a more important one with more legitimacy, which is the war against Hitler. He said, all of a sudden, yesterday, my lawyers were attacking you. Today, I welcome you in the Oval Office so we can plan the arsenal of democracy. What a change. And business said, phew, that was a relief. And the New Deal basically stopped around 1938. So it was you want to consider that factor. How does business feel about government, and how intimidated is it? Today, we look quite a bit at data about uncertainty. Uncertainty was reduced when the war approached because business knew the government was no longer attacking it.
Nowadays, the entitlement state, the welfare state is growing so large, and we've gotten to a point where we've gone beyond the point of no return, that Americans wouldn't want to turn their back on that, and we would go down the road of so many countries that are in the European Union?
Well, this is a question that we act as if it's our decision. We went too far down the road to the social democratic state. It's not our decision. It's the decision of the bond market. If the world bond market and the world currency markets decides the dollar is trash, then we will pay for that in higher interest rates and government trouble. And then we'll have to react like any other country, which is we'll have to balance our budget. What we have now is the luxury of being the so-called currency of reserve, where everybody loves us no matter what. So there's no consequence to our actions. But that's because, generally, historically, the U.S. is a big, mighty power, the currency of reserve, the superpower, and also our economy was less bad than others. There was no currency that could really challenge ours because Europe was even more in debt. That could shift, say, from an alternate currency. It could come from, some people have heard of Bitcoin, the virtual currency. The dollar can be challenged not only by a sovereign state, but also even by a company in combo with a commodity. So it's not up to us when we decide we went too far. The markets are going to tell us. Some of the viewers will recall what happened to President Clinton when he was running for president. The bond market got scared that President Clinton, if he would be elected, would make a government that was too big, and it was the bond prices changed, and President Clinton's team was intimidated, and they joked about it. When I die, James Carville said, I want to come back and be the bond market so I can scare everyone, even the mightiest of the Democratic leaders. It's sort of like that. This isn't totally up to us. We think we're an island, the U.S., but we're not. Our currency is traded. China may decide when we have to balance our budget.
Getting back to Coolidge, he had the reputation, again, as you mentioned, of being Silent Cal. What about the story, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, about the woman saying, I can't get more than two words out of you?
Great story.
Could you recall that story and tell us if it's a true story?
Well, insofar as we can tell, it's true because it was retold by the Coolidge family. There are other things we've heard of Coolidge that aren't true. Probably, but this was true. Coolidge was silent, in part because he didn't want to hand out political favors, and the less the talk, the less the promises, right? Mm-hmm. So a fancy society lady sat next to him at some affair in Washington and said in that bright way, I made a bet that I could get you to say more than 2 words tonight, sir. And President Coolidge, or maybe Vice President then, said, you lose, and bit his tongue. He was a Vermonter. He was a silent New Englander, more a silent farmer type, I would say. We have this out here in the West. But he also knew how to ham it up.
Amity Shlaes, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.